For these poor devils, it's too late. But there is hope.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado.
And I am Dan Simon, podcasting from the Studio Simon headquarters at historic Bowman Field in Louisville, Kentucky.
Dan, this is a fun one. I feel like I say that all the time at the beginning of our episodes, but this is a fun one. This is a unique situation. This is an Australian-themed baseball team in Zebulon, North Carolina. I have recently learned how to pronounce Zebulon, as you will hear in this episode. That it happens in real time during one of the interviews. Zebulon, North Carolina, formerly home to the beloved Carolina Mudcats, who had one of the classic brands in minor league baseball. This team will be playing at the ballpark where the old Mudcats used to play, taking up the mantle of teams whose names end with a Z. So there's a lot going on with this Zebulon Devil Dogz, and we'll get into all the meanings behind the names and whatnot. But for our purposes on this podcast, you and I both really appreciated that old Mudcats logo, and we both appreciated team names that end with the letter Z.
Well, and what I appreciate about this, in addition to all that, is not only is this a team name that ends with the letter Z, it begins with the letter
That's
Z.
Right.
And also, here's something I really appreciate about it.
Yeah.
When I was a kid growing up in Wayne, New Jersey, my favorite pastry snack food were devil dogs. A devil dog pastry, first of all, it's kind of shaped like an eclair, right?
Yeah,
shaped
sure.
like an eclair, but nothing like an eclair. What it is, picture a hot dog bun. That's instead of just opened like a book, is two separate pieces if you separate the top from the bottom. But the hot dog bun is, that's the shape. But picture that's actually two pieces of chocolate cake. And then in between is a white cream, sort of like inside the middle of an Oreo, but softer. Okay. And that's what a devil dog is. So we had Hostess, but for some reason, the baked good snacks my mom would get were always made by Drake's. Have you ever heard of that company?
Drake's Devil Dogz. I Googled it while you were talking about it because it sounded familiar to me. A devil dog is a lot of things, Dan, and it's, we're going to find that in this episode. There's lots of reasons that this team is called the Devil Dogz, and it is definitely a fun conversation. Before we get to the episode, before we get to the conversation, we do have a couple letters. We have invited people to send letters to the podcast. You can do that by just emailing me at my email address. It's pauljcaputo@gmail.com. Or you can find me on the socials, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram. Those are the ones I'm mainly on. Find me on the socials and just let me know if you send me a letter that it's intended for the show. We have two this week. Dan, I want to get to the first one. We know that Michael Sellers is a fan of your Rome Emperors brand that you created. He has said on many occasions on his own show, Up to Chat, and on this show that he feels that is the best logo in the history of sports. He wrote into us about that logo. He said, "Hi, Paul and Dan!" ! As you are both well aware by now, I am a huge fan of the Rome Emperor's entire set of logos! ! While I am fully convinced that they are the best logos in sports history and therefore could not realistically have been done any better, I do wonder what other routes or ideas that Dan had in mind when making these logos. So I was wondering if there were any other logos or sketches out there that Dan had for the Emperors while going through their design process, and if so, is he at liberty to show them?
I'm at liberty to show anything I gosh darn please.
Wow.
Sorry for the language there.
I'll bleep it.
But in this case, there's really nothing to share, and here's the reason why. When I am developing a sports brand identity, there are times that I present multiple options for consideration. However, there are times when, not that there really isn't or aren't any other options, But there were times, and in this case, this was the case here, where I had a vision for something that was very specific. And I had this vision in my mind of this pontificating penguin with his chin raised in a very hoity fashion. And I got that down first on paper and then executed it digitally in the computer. Now, when I did the first round presentation, I did present the primary logo. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 different options for how the penguin and the type and the other supporting elements would work together. So there were things for the client to choose from. So really not a lot. I don't think it's very interesting to see, okay, this time his arm is like this time it's like that. Well, it wasn't an arm, it was a flipper, but anthropomorphized, I guess it makes an arm. But that's the story behind this particular identity. And that's what I got to say about that.
Dan, we have another letter here, and this is on a more serious topic. This is from a gentleman named Gilly Contreras, who we had exchanged some messages about the use of artificial intelligence, AI, in design. I appreciate his thoughts on this, and I wanted to share what he wrote about AI in design. And then he has he has a company, Bueno Biscuits. He's the owner and graphic designer for a company called Bueno Biscuits. But what Gilly wrote was, like every other artist right now, I am frustrated and worried about the use of AI in design. I have noticed more and more teams, collegiate baseball and other sports, are using AI programs to design their alternate identities and possibly even their primary. I actually got into baseball because I started listening to your podcast after a minor league hat got my attention, the Hartford Yard Goats. That's a classic, of course, from Brandiose. I went down the rabbit hole of what this is, why they are goats, and who designed it. Once I started listening to your podcast, I learned more about the towns and communities these teams come from. It combined my interests in history, culture, and how it influences graphic design, a hobbyist sociologist. The mascots were fun and so personal. I loved learning about some of the older ones because they were just designed by a random person whom management knew. No big company, no big agency, just some local artist. It felt personal, homegrown, and people found pride in it. As a Salvadoran living in eastern North Carolina, I love designs that connect me to these different aspects of my life. Artists are influenced by everything. Their favorite artists, TV, movies, cartoons, comic strips, favorite teams, nostalgic advertisements, family, childhood memories, and their own quirks. While their designs can be simple, it feels so human. They are the people who channel all this inspiration chaos into a New Hampshire seagull holding a bat that, for some reason, someone from Italy can relate to. Gilly clearly is listening to this podcast, Dan. That's a conversation from a previous episode. So when I start seeing these teams use AI for mascots, I feel so disappointed and saddened. The designs are flat and uninspired. Even though they have pillaged the art community, it justifies the naysayers' claims that teams are simply following trends to only sell merch. There is no connection. A person doesn't design it. Rather, it's some program scraping photographs and copying artists, mimicking art styles because it was told to. Some server in the middle of nowhere is designing an anthropomorphized food that only people within a 200-mile radius know about. It's not someone from that community or someone else commissioned who got to learn about a cultural touchstone for a region. It's hollow. Is it cheap for a team? Probably. Will it be a lasting design? Probably not. Some people may not notice or even care if it is AI. It will get a chuckle or a smirk, and then people will scroll on. People subconsciously sense the shallowness, and it won't hold permanence in their minds, and then it will be forgotten like every other AI design. Designs lost to the digital capitalist void. There is a reason why people fight against the redesign of old school logos and designs. It holds a special place for them and each person for a unique reason. They found it resonated with something in their lives. We desire things that reflect us, not what imitates us. I know that may be too long to read on the podcast, but I just wanted a better way to express my thoughts. Guess what? It was not too long to read on the podcast. I thought it was really interesting and well stated. I appreciate Gilly writing in with this. It's, I think, really critically important right now, almost a crisis in this field, because yeah, it's you can do something crappy for free, and even on the off chance that you use AI to create something that isn't crappy, you're still, as Gilly points out, scrubbing other people's intellectual property to create something. On the off chance that you come up with something that doesn't look technically terrible, you still are using a process that is ethically unsound. And I'm saying this as a person who doesn't mind AI in general. I think there are great purposes, there are great functions for AI that will help humanity. Imagery generated by AI is not one of them.
You know what? I have to admit, I don't really have anything to add to this for two reasons. One is Gilly's letter was very well written, and the things he stated, as I'm sitting here listening, I'm just thinking, "Hear, hear." I wanted to shout out to him, "Hear, hear." And then what you then said on top of it, I agree wholeheartedly. Not just because it affects my industry directly, but every time I see something AI, even if it has nothing to do with my industry, I see
Yeah.
something, I can tell it's AI and it's soulless.
Yeah.
And this our whole, I said I had nothing to add, but I am adding, our whole existence is based on humanity. We're not here if it wasn't for living, breathing human beings. And don't take living human beings out of the equation.
Dan, let's get to a logo. Let's get to talking about a logo that was generated by a real human artist named Brian Begley. Brian Begley has been on the show before. We're about to have a conversation with Caleb Whitmore from the team. He's got a lot of fun things to say about this brand. And then after that, Dan, you're going to be back with a Studio Simon Stumper that you created with your own human brain.
Nicely done. Well, yes, I will be back. I'll see you soon.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Welcome to the podcast, Caleb Whitmore, who is the general manager for the Zebulon Devil Dogz. Caleb, good morning. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
I am thrilled to talk to you, and I'm so glad that Zebulon, North Carolina, still has baseball to attend thanks to the Devil Dogz. This is obviously a big deal since the Carolina Mudcats departed to become the Wilson Warbirds 20 miles away. They still have baseball in the form of the Devil Dogz. This brand is so much fun. Created by Brian Begley, who has been on this podcast before. He did the Crystal City Booty Divers. That was one of Brian's. I'm going to ask you a sort of 30,000-foot question here. I always like to start this way. Why is this team called the Devil Dogz?
Yeah, great question. And you mentioned Brian, but he did an awesome job. So shout out to him. We were really happy with the product that he came with. We really just had a name and a very general idea, and he put it together in a really cool way. So we're super thankful for him. But in terms of the name, our kind of goal going into it was something that's fun. Obviously, baseball should be fun. The CPL is about fun. We don't want to take ourselves too seriously. We didn't want to be a gimmick though, so kind of that line of, something fun, but not too far in the other direction. And we had the Australian tie-in, but we also really need to be Zebulon's team. So how do we do this in a way where it feels Aussie and it feels kind of comfortable for our players and something that represents them, but the average attendee who's from Zebulon, North Carolina is going to feel like we're really representing them too. So the Devil Dogz was a cool way to kind of have the Tasmanian Devil tie-in with the textile history that Zebulon has in the fond memories of Devil Dog dungarees, hearing stories of, folks going before school to pick up a new pair of jeans at the factory on their way and things like that. So kind of tying in the history of Zebulon there.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, not the least of which is I think I've been mispronouncing Zebulon. I've been saying Zebulon. And so,
Yeah, we made that mistake too. I've got an amazing staff and they are all coming from North Carolina, but none of them from this area. And
yeah.
we got corrected a few times when we first got here about the way to say it. So we're trying to be real careful at Zebulon now for sure.
Zebulon. You mentioned the Australia tie-in. You've talked about this on other podcasts. You were on Ed Rivera's Dad Hat Chronicles. But for listeners of Baseball by Design, what is that Australia tie-in? That's a unique situation that you guys have going on.
Yes, sir. So we partnered with a company called Ozball. Think kind of like perfect game travel circuit kind of thing, but for Australia. They actually just announced a couple of days ago that they are part of Perfect Game now. They're going to essentially run Perfect Game in Australia. So because Australian high level baseball, at least, is a pretty tight-knit group. There's only about 120 current college players from Australia in the States. They pretty much know everybody. They've either coached them, they've coached against them, or they know the coach of essentially anyone who is at the level that could come over here and compete in a league like this. So they had initially started reaching out to us about playing some exhibition games right around the time that this team kind of came to be. And we're like, well, we're actually going to have a brand new team that needs a roster. And they had played against the Savannah Bananas before. They think they're the gold standard, which we tend to agree in terms of fan entertainment. They're all about involving the fan, being in the community, all those kind of things that we were going to expect of our team, regardless of their nationality. So it was kind of a perfect fit where we get to partner with a cool group that already gets it, and we don't have to train them on what's expected. And they have a really cool accent and things like that too. So this year we're going to be predominantly Australian. We will have a few American kids because it's a brand new team and we've got to have a full roster and protected in case of injuries and stuff like that. But the long-term goal is that at some point it does become 100% Australian as well.
It's been interesting to watch baseball grow in Australia, right? Because they have the Australian Baseball League, which has largely been American prospects playing in Australia during the winter months.
Yeah.
But it really seems like baseball is growing in Australia, and they, every year they seem to qualify, or every time it comes around, they seem to qualify for the World Baseball Classic. They haven't advanced too far in it, but for a team in North Carolina to be rostered and largely by Australian players and ultimately entirely by Australian players is a really sort of interesting take, and I think it speaks to what's happening with baseball maybe around the world and in Australia in particular. I understand that that's not a question, that's just sort of an observation on what,
No,
what you were saying.
we're in agreement 100%. The quality is really good. They are still falling behind a little bit in terms of discovery. That's kind of the goal for them, and that's a big part of what we're going to play. We can't shut out a ton of the players yet because we're still in contract, kind of figuring out some of that stuff. But we got everywhere from some high-end Division I guys to some JUCO kids that are freshmen that are tearing up junior college right now and just didn't get enough representation in Australia. So they're coming over for a year, and hopefully we're going to be part of the process in helping them land a 4-year scholarship.
Okay, so there are three things. I mentioned there's a lot that I want to unpack here. There are three things about this brand that I want to ask you about: the Tasmanian Devil, the Dungarees, and the letter Z. So I'm going to start with the Tasmanian Devil. Obviously, there is already sort of an image of the Tasmanian Devil out there. This version of it is different. The Tasmanian Devil is a little kind of adorable but ferocious scavenger that lives on the island of Tasmania in Australia. Did you learn anything about Tasmanian devils? What was it that where you were like, okay, we're going to do the Tasmanian Devil for this brand? What, aside from it just being Australian?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing in our I wouldn't exactly say our mascot or logo represents it too much, but how small they are.
Yeah.
I would have expected they'd be a lot bigger, and just kind of my research. Wow, they are really a small dog kind of thing. But I mean, it's certainly our goal with the brand was not necessarily to do exactly a Tasmanian Devil, more just kind of pull for that and pull from kind of the Devil Dog, which is a nickname they use for it as well.
They're actually kind of adorable. And I went to Australia in 2010, and we went to a zoo in Tasmania. And my daughter, who was 3 at the time, got to pet a baby Tasmanian devil. And it's one of my favorite photos of all time. So I may have to post that on social media when this episode goes up.
That's great.
Obviously, another connection, and this one is a connection to Zebulon, which is Devil Dog Dungarees, which is, and you mentioned the textile industry. There are teams out there that are based on the textile industry in various ways. But this is a company that is special to the region. What is Devil Dog Dungarees?
Yeah, so in the past, I would say ending maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it was an employer in this area. At one point, a major employer in this area. The company was at one point locally owned. It is not anymore. It's actually part of a larger clothing conglomerate in New York, and it's more of like a high-end jean that's sold in a few department stores now. But it started right here in Zebulon, made right here in Zebulon. The sign, if you haven't seen it, is has been redone. It's still in the building, kind of maybe a mile down the road from us. It's a really cool, I think like huge version of like a neon bar sign type of thing, but outside that says Devil Dog Dungarees on it. So it's got a great representation to this area. The company has been super welcoming with us and kind of chatting through what they do. Now we are not technically the same name. It's spelled differently and things like that. So we're not technically tied to them. It's more of just a nod at that history, but we are certainly going to lean in the Gene way. We're talking right now about do we do, a denim promotional night, have the coaches wear jorts every once in a while, different things like that. So anyway, we can lean into the kind of the fun Gene nature. We will.
Well, the Devil Dog character in the logo is, of course, wearing dungarees. So, that's that connection, is obviously there in the logo. I have to say, my background's in graphic design. I went to school for graphic design, and we are required by law to love old signs. And I just Googled this Devil Dog Dungarees sort of neon billboard almost that as you say has been refurbished, and it's very cool. It's definitely something that anyone who has studied graphic design would be required by law to stop and take a picture
Yeah.
of. So
Yeah, we,
so,
we love it. We've talked about the potential of potentially long-term moving it to the ballpark somewhere or having a
oh.
secondary one made to put in the ballpark somewhere. It's a really cool part of the town's history that fits in really well with us, obviously. And the Gene Company was named after a special forces arm in the military. I want to say it was the Marines, but I could be getting that wrong. So I apologize to anybody if I am in real time here. But it was kind of a nod to them, and that was more thought of, from my understanding, is closer to our logo in terms of like a devilish dog than necessarily a Tasmanian devil. So that's kind of where we went in that. Obviously in our logo and when we release our mascot here, hopefully relatively soon, like the goal is to kind of make it doggish because that's fun for kids too, right?
Mhm.
And we kind of went with more of a large standing dog figure with some devil horns that I think will represent us a little better in terms of like fan engagement and stuff like that.
Now, I think we're 5 layers deep now with the Marine nickname being Devil Dogs as well. So this is just like an onion, right? Keep peeling back stuff here. So
Yeah.
it's great. The letter Z. Listeners of this podcast will know that the erstwhile Northern Colorado Owls with a Z, that was my team here in Fort Collins, Colorado. They are no more. That team folded kind of in the middle of last season. So I was very glad to see that you all have taken up the mantle of baseball teams whose names end with the letter Z. Obviously, the letter Z is important to Zebulon because Zebulon begins with a Z. By being the Devil Dogs with a Z, you can bookend, Z's on both ends. But how come you guys went with the Z at the end of dogs instead of the S?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that one too. So we started with Devil Dogs spelled normal. And we went to Brian and asked for a design. And without asking, Brian made the tail a Z.
Mm.
His thought, I think, initially was just kind of a tie to Zebulon, and it looked cool with the arrow. And, from that first design, we certainly made a lot of changes. But one of the things we said immediately was that we're not changing anything about that. That is awesome. And it actually wasn't really supposed to be a focal point in terms of his first word marks and stuff, but we very early were like, that's going to be on the hat. That is the symbol that we want to use. It just looked so clean. It represents Zebulon. And the more we looked into, making sure this is our name, like I said, we want to tie to the textile history, but we are not in copyright with Devil Dog Dungarees. We are our own thing. So ways to make sure that it was different enough and things like that, adding the Z on helped in that sense. And some of the folks we met in Australia had also mentioned that some folks in Australia use dogs spelt with an S as kind of an insult. So adding the Z on there changed the connotation for them as well.
I mean, like you say, layers and layers and layers. The spaded devil tail, is featured prominently here, right? Like you've got it at the end of well, obviously it's on the Z of Zebulon. It's
Yeah.
on the Z at the end of dogs. It's also on the end of the L, and then it's on the, did I say this out loud? It's on the tail of the actual mascot. But also you have, I presume, a cap logo, which is just the letter Z.
Yeah.
and it has the devil's tail on it as well. So that Z really has become emblematic of this team. So it's interesting that that was just a design element from Brian at first, and then it
Yeah,
became
I
sort of
wish I could say we were so smart as to strategize that, but that was just Brian being creative and giving us some cool ideas. And we're fondly referencing Zebulon as Z Town with that Z in a lot of places and stuff like that. So we're really running with it for sure.
yeah, absolutely. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was I referenced it at the beginning of the interview here, which was, the Carolina Mudcats left Five County Stadium and then you all moved in. It's important to this community to have baseball. They've had baseball there since 1991. Was that a factor in this team's decision or your decision to establish a team in Zebulon? Was the fact that they lost their baseball and there was a void there for that community? Was that an important part of this conversation?
Major factor. Absolutely. Yeah. This is a really cool historic community that has supported baseball for a really long time. And then on the other side of it, it's also a community that's growing really fast with new people that need something to do as well. So it was kind of two facet there. There was certainly some atrophy towards the end in terms of, the former team, and that happens when you find out a team's going to leave. You're just not going to support it as much. And so we felt it was really important that what is currently called Five County Stadium for now remain a ballpark and remain a entertainment hub and a place that the town can be proud of. That's going to be our games. That's going to be all sorts of other community events. But there's a ton of housing going in here, and there's not enough infrastructure yet. So rather than, for example, it getting flattened and turning into apartments or something like that, where, this town needs some things to do where they don't need to feel like they have to drive into Raleigh to do anything, where they've got something in their backyard that they can feel really proud of. And whether it's during baseball season or not during baseball season, they can, on a Friday night, their first thought will be, hey, what's going on at the stadium? What can we do here?
Caleb, I always do this. I lied to you. I have one more question because this is a really fun detail that you all have in your uniforms. I'm going to ask you to explain it, but my understanding is that you have zipper pinstripes on one of your uniforms.
Yeah, I believe that was a Brian thing as well. I am partial to pinstripes, which is funny because I am a diehard Red Sox fan, and
Oh,
pinstripes are pretty synonymous with our biggest rival for sure. But I think it's a traditional baseball look that looks really clean, and I especially like teams that do we'll call it like different colored pinstripes, the
hmm.
non-white jersey pinstripes. So we had asked for that kind of idea. And my first thought was whether it's red or we had talked about powder blue or a navy that we settled on, just a colored pinstripe jersey. And Brian came back with this really cool pinstripe that, if you look closely, is actually a zipper the entire way. So just a cool tie-in to the jeans part. And if you're far away, you might not even notice it. But if you're looking at it, or if you buy a jersey and things like that, it's just we're trying to really take pride on the details and everything we do as we build this up. So just kind of another way that we can add a special detail in for Zebulon.
The irony of the zipper pinstripes is that it's a pullover jersey. So you've got, all these zipper stripes and it's actually a pullover jersey.
Yeah.
I am looking at it now. It's super cool. And they're like very wide pinstripes too, right? Like, I mean, the space between the pinstripes is really wide. So it's a distinctive look and a cool jersey. I have to ask, with that fandom of yours and you being the general manager, the uniform is largely blue. The socks are decidedly red. Those red socks, is that a wink and a nod to your favorite team?
It could have been a little bit. When we looked at a few color options, red was always going to be one of them. If you've been to the stadium, we've got 7,000 seats and about 5,000 of them are red. And the other ones are getting taken out. So we are going to have all red seats here pretty soon. So I think it would have looked pretty weird if red wasn't part of the brand, because that's not changing in our stadium. We looked at a few different blues. I came from Carolina, from UNC, and so I love the light blue, whether it's Carolina blue or powder blue. But we need to have some respect to our market too, and we are certainly not in Carolina country out here. So we went with a navy blue that we thought would represent the state and the ECU fans out here a little bit better.
Caleb, where can people find you guys online? Where can they see your schedule? Where can they buy some Devil Dogs merch?
Yeah, so Zebulon Devil Dogz, dogs spelled with a Z.com. is a great place to start. That's got links to all of our socials. Our name is unique enough that if you spell it with the dogs on any of the social medias, you'll find us pretty easily. But yeah, we've got a few merch options right now as we wait for the more advanced things to come in. So some t-shirts and sweatshirts right on our website, as well as season tickets and mini plans. Singles will come out in April. But we're all you can eat food. It's a great value. The goal is to make it as family friendly and as affordable as possible. So get in on the ground floor and become one of our first fans.
All you can eat food and a baseball team that ends with a Z. I may just have to move to North Carolina here. I
Yeah,
think it's
let's
time.
do it. We'd love to have you. Everyone else is moving to Zebulon. We got to add one more.
Caleb, thank you so much. This has been fun, and I hope to see you at the ballpark.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Brian Begley. You may remember Brian from our Crystal City Booty Divers episode a little while ago. I don't know, a few months ago. Brian, welcome back. This is a fun brand that you created for Zebulon.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me again.
I should mention that you are Brian Begley of Brian Begley Design, and you created this brand for the Zebulon Devil Dogz. The first thing I thought of, when you hear Tasmanian Devil, of course, you've got that image of the popular image of the Tasmanian Devil. I have been lucky enough to see real Tasmanian devils in Tasmania, in Australia. That was pretty cool. I'm curious for you, the inspiration in creating a brand based on a Tasmanian devil, was it difficult to avoid that image that we already have, that cartoonized image that we all have? And did you spend any time, on YouTube looking at real Tasmanian devils?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's awesome that you got to see one of those in real life because I've never done that before, but I've seen the videos and I'd love to get my hands on one of them. But to be honest, that was so what you finally see is the fourth or fifth concept of what I actually gave them. So nothing did look like the Tasmanian Devil that everyone knows, but to stay away from anything that anyone has ever seen before, that I think is always a designer's first step in creating something is, are people going to like this and have they seen this before? I've done that in the past where I'll do something and I'll still do it today where I'll say, have some friends look at, what do you think of this? And they go, oh, that looks like, and I go, I just spent days researching to see if anything looks anything like this. And they'll point it out and I'll just be like, the drawing board again. But yeah, with this one, there was definitely a couple versions of different dog faces. Everything was definitely a dog look to it. But also to keep in mind with having that Australian meets USA, like because they were playing everything off the Devil Dogz dungarees, in USA. So that's why he's wearing the overalls. That's why he's trying to tie those things in together to make things look like they belong. So that was the task.
Well, you mentioned the idea of sort of tying different ideas together and those layers of the dungarees. It's a devil. It's the Tasmanian Devil. It's got the word dog in the title, and Tasmanian devils are not dogs, and so you've got that sort of added element there.
Yeah.
For me, from a design perspective, Tasmanian devils are these kind of ferocious scavengers, and before they're 2 years old, they're adorable. And my 3-year-old daughter was petting one at the zoo in Tasmania, right? Like, so that was fine. After they're 2 years old, I saw them tear apart a rack of kangaroo ribs, right? Like they just decimated bones and all. Tore it apart, decimated. So they're kind of ferocious. Their jaw is stronger than, like 10 times stronger than like a pit bull's, right? Like it's I forget what the actual stat is, but super strong jaws. You've got the notion of the devil, right? Like you've got the devil horns, you've got the forked tail or whatever the tail is called on a devil, and you've got this bright red sort of, and he's got this sort of mean look on his face, and yet the whole thing comes across as kind of kid friendly, right? Like while the booty divers were maybe PG-13, this is definitely PG, right? Like this is, I want to give this character a hug, even though he's all of those things. How do you accomplish that as a designer?
Well, the first couple ones that we did too, like the first couple of concepts, there was a lot more friendlier looking of faces with them that were smiling, a tongue sticking out. You could see it in their eyes mostly. yeah, we decided to kind of go mean with it. We kind of all agreed that the colors involved would be red and a form of blue. So that's what, the navy was with the denim, and then they wanted to go with red. So the red and blue was there. So I mean, when we started putting all that stuff together, it just became, all right, so this mascot is going to be red. No matter what kind of animal we're using, it's probably going to be red. And then, incorporating all that stuff, does he wear a hat? Does he not wear a hat? Do the horns come through the hat? Do we put horns on it? The tail is actually in the shape of a Z.
Yes.
So we had to make sure that, you know, there's times where logos can be flip-flopped, specifically like if you think about like a football helmet, Baltimore Ravens, like that logo is different on both sides,
Mm.
but they make it work. This one, the tail would definitely have to be shifted around quite a lot to make that Z come through. But yeah, I think there was, anything from throwing to batting, a happier one kind of coming out at you, biting the ball, all these different things to where, you know, like you said, you want to make it kid friendly still, but I think they want to add a little bit of, you're new to the league. You want to show that you got a little bit of something behind you. So that was kind of it. I remember we wanted to go. I gave them a version of something that was kind of teal and yellow,
Mm.
but that wasn't couldn't really do that. We just did that with the yard gnomes, so that would in the same league, so we couldn't really do that.
Yeah, and the red certainly goes with this whole notion of the devil. You mentioned
Yeah.
the letter Z. You've got Zebulon, which begins with a Z. You've got dogs with ends with a Z. You've got the
Uh,
tail in the shape of a Z, and then you've got the Z on the jersey that the mascot is wearing here. So, and then the devil's tail is incorporated onto the end of the Z in dogs. The Z became sort of more and more prominent. Whenever I look at it, I'm finding another Z here. Is that something that you brought to this, or was that did they really want to emphasize the letter Z as part of their brand?
I remember when first doing this, the research I did was, I guess in Australia, the nickname for calling somebody, I think like a buddy or a bro or a pal is dog. However, they say it as it was spelled from my research DAG, like dag. I
Oh,
guess the with that, I remember putting as a nickname for the team, spelling out Dags, DAGS. And then it was like maybe it'll look as America as not being the smartest by misspelling the word dog. So there was a
right.
translation right there. And then when it became let's go with dogs, I think it was DAWGZ,
hmm
and then it was
hmm
like let's just DOGZ.
The horns coming through the hat is kind of funny to me because my first thought is like, oh no, he ruined his hat by poking those horns through him. But now I kind of want to see if there's a way for the team to incorporate that into their actual on-field uniforms here. Like, I wonder if they're even allowed to wear, baseball caps with horns on them when they're out there on the field.
Yeah, right. No, well, I remember talking to a couple people too, where I forget what team does it, but the hat is just a set of eyes. Like there's a couple minor league teams that do have a hat that has just eyes. So I'm wondering,
Yeah,
could this be something where it's just an embroidered horns on the side too? Just kind of getting crazy with it. But
yeah.
yeah, I
The
think there's a lot of elements they can play off with.
One of the things to me that's notable for this team is that the Carolina Mudcats played in this ballpark, and Zebulon had a team dating back to 1991, and that was even though they only moved 20 miles away to Wilson to become the Warbirds, I feel like there was a baseball void left in Zebulon. There was a baseball void left in the sort of pantheon of minor league baseball logos, right? Like the Mudcats were a classic brand. Did you feel any pressure bringing to life a brand for the team that was going to take up, play in Five County Stadium there? Was that, did you feel the pressure of that legendary Mudcats brand, or was that just not part of the equation?
No, absolutely. I was very much aware of the Mudcats to the point where I remember having to I don't know how much time, maybe minutes up to a half hour, anytime I sat down to design was to tell myself this was brand new. This had no association. with the Mudcats, the stadium, because I know that that would just have added more pressure to me, and I
Yeah.
think I probably would have done stuff that would probably focus more on giving a nod to the team
Mm.
where the Devil Dogs are playing now. But I think the color red was the biggest nod to the Mudcats. Other than that, was just trying not to think anything about them because it was no offense, but it's kind of, I don't want to say intimidating. I think every designer wants to do these kinds of jobs where you're kind of taking on something that could be like, what's the next big thing that could take over? So I think it's I love working under pressure, but I also like to psych myself out of how big this could be,
Yeah.
so just to take something off my shoulders. But no, that was, I wanted to do them justice, and I wanted to, make sure that they had something good in there. And I think there's definitely a collaborative effort with everyone from behind the scenes too. So we liked it.
Well, it's also, when you're creating something new, it's basically impossible to compete with nostalgia, right? Like, I mean, that's just, that
Yeah.
force is there's no competing with that when you're creating something new. You mentioned, that you were looking at the spelling of dogs and you were, thinking about how they do it in Australia. I'm wondering, since this roster is made up of Australian players, did you look at sports branding in Australia at all as part of your process?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was a ton of basketball. It's their version of professional basketball over there, and there was a ton of stuff that you can be inspired by and everything. The I guess it was knowing the colors beforehand. Me personally, my design process is going black and white and add color later.
Yeah.
Because I figure if you can do something in black and white, color is no problem. But yeah, when I saw everything that was going on, that was in Australia, as far as sports went and everything, that was 100% wanting to connect that over there to over here because I can't imagine flying across the globe just to play baseball, and then on top of that, calling a place home where, so you want to give somebody a sense of home when they're not home, and kind of tie it all together there. But no, I think that was an awesome question. Yeah, I definitely looked up a ton of sports stuff over there.
Cool. You incorporated a unique feature onto one of the jerseys that is a wink and a nod to, one of the namesakes or one of the inspirations for this name. What was that?
So it was Dungarees being the denim company and everything, we had to incorporate the pinstripe to look like a zipper. Uh, I didn't want to do super tight pinstripe like a Yankee pinstripe, but just something to where it's a subtle, deeper tone in the jersey, but it is a zipper. I had a friend give me that idea as what would happen if this was the zipper looking like this, and I was kind of going, you're right, let's try that. And it came out, and I remember submitting these things, and finally, when I saw it released, I was like, yes, they went with it. It was a good feeling to see that one make it through because I thought that was just a cool little nod.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Brian, this is such a fun brand. I'm so glad we caught up. People don't know, but
yeah.
it was an adventure trying to make this work, even from a
It was.
technology standpoint. Where can
Yep.
people find the work that you're doing online? Where can people come check you out on social media?
Social media, all my socials are at I am Brian Begley, and my website is iambrianbegley.com.
Fantastic. Well, look forward to having you back on the podcast, Brian. And thank you so much. And congratulations on a fun brand. I'm absolutely going to get some merch from Zebulon here.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for having me again. Appreciate it.
Deep within the recesses of his secret headquarters, somewhere in Louisville, Kentucky, sits Dan Simon. By day, Dan is the owner of Studio Simon, but by night, he tries to stump one Paul Caputo. This is Studio Simon Stumper.
All right, everyone, welcome back. It is time for Studio Simon Stumpers with my very good human friend, Dan Simon. Dan, welcome back. The Devil Dogz. What a fun brand. I really like it. It's a Tasmanian devil. kind of. It's an actual devil. He's wearing Devil Dog dungarees. What a fun brand. So many things to base a Studio Simon Stumper off of that, of course, as always, I have done zero research except for the conversations that were part of this episode. So I'm curious to see, as always, where you went with this week's Studio Simon Stumper.
Well, I just want to mention something you just said. In the intro to this, we talked about the Devil Dog snack food that I loved as a child. And you just used the word dungarees because there was a company in Zebulon called Devil Dogz Dungarees. And
Yes.
when I was a child, we didn't call denim pants jeans. A matter of fact, I don't even remember at first knowing that was a word for those. They were dungarees to me. For the first 7 years of my life, I lived in New York City, specifically the borough of Queens. And I don't remember anybody in Queens referring to jeans as jeans. They were dungarees. Now, I never say dungarees anymore, but when you just said it, as Devil Dogz brought me back to fond memories of my childhood, so did the word dungarees.
You know, what's funny about that, Dan, we were talking on an episode a couple weeks ago about my international baseball experiences. When I was in London for the London series and the Phillies were playing the Mets, I dressed as outrageously Philliesed up as I could, and I was wearing Phillies overalls, like powder blue Phillies overalls that looked like they were sort of paint splattered, and they had the Phillies logo on them. And the British fans at that game called them dungarees. You know, I got a lot, I'm not going to do the accent, but I got a lot of like, hey, nice dungarees there, pal. And so, I thought maybe dungarees was a British word for overalls. So, but apparently it's also a word that was jeans before jeans was jeans. So it's a fun word. Dungarees is a fun word.
Yeah, yes, it very much is. Now, speaking about words, words need to be, when written, need to be spelled. So that's the best segue I could come up with for this.
It's a really tenuous one, Dan. Like we've had some good ones on the podcast before with that.
Well, wait till you hear the stumper, and maybe it will be better.
Okay, this one's about words.
Words and their spellings. So
Okay,
our Studio
letters.
Simon Stumper today asks, which of these three current or former independent minor league baseball dog teams is the only one to spell dogs Dogs? Is it A, the Down East Bird Dogs? Is it B, the Lincoln Salt Dogs? Or is it C, the San Diego Surf Dogs?
Yeah.
Down East Bird Dogs, current team in the Frontier League.
Yeah.
Lincoln Salt Dogs, current team in the American Association. And San Diego Surf Dogs, former team in the long gone Golden Baseball League.
Okay. I'm pretty sure, Dan, that the answer is Salt Dogs, unless for some reason it would be a factor that Salt Dogs, I think, is just one word. So does that matter whether the DOGS is part of a compound word or not?
It does not matter.
Okay.
I'm only talking about the dogs part.
Okay. I think that the Bird Dogs have an AW, I think. The Surf Dogs I'm not familiar with, but I'm going to assume they did something wacky, perhaps a Z/Z. And I think that the Salt Dogs are just regular old dogs with a DOGS. So I'm going to go Lincoln Salt Dogs, just like 6 hours away from here, but I still have not been to a game in Lincoln to see the Salt Dogs play.
I was looking forward to this question because as opposed to one we did recently where you just had to make a guess, although it turned out you got it right because there was something in the back of your mind that led you to making that guess. I thought this one you would know because you're familiar with these brand identities, or at least these team names. And I am happy to report that you answered correctly. You were worried there.
I was
weren't
nervous.
you?
The two most stress-inducing parts of the Studio Simon Stumper are the moments where I'm settling on a final answer, and then the moments before you reveal whether I was right or not. So yeah, my heart was pounding there, Dan. I was like, did I get it wrong? Did I somehow I'm remembering the Salt Dogs wrong?
I'm happy to report that you nailed it. And now both the Down East Bird Dogs and the San Diego Surf Dogs spell dogs Dawgs. Now, you said you were not familiar with the San Diego Surf Dogs. You have heard of them, haven't you?
I've heard of them. I couldn't picture the spelling. I didn't.
I know the designer who did it.
Is it someone who is on this podcast right now?
Yes, it is, and it's not you. But here's the thing. I did that many years ago, and I kind of remember you were asking if maybe one of these spelled it with a Z as opposed to an S. I think when the client first gave us that name, I think they had it with a Z, and then they changed it, decided to just go with S. I kind of recall that's what happened with that.
Okay.
So,
Dan, we're recording this episode a couple of weeks before Ranger Amy and I take a trip to San Diego. I'm going to use a word I learned from Todd Radum's. This is a hashtag humble brag here. I have an advanced copy of Todd Radum's new book, The Ballpark and Beyond. And in the intro to that book, he uses the word interregnum, which I had never heard before. It means the period between. So in the interregnum between this recording and this episode dropping, Ranger Amy and I will have been to San Diego. And I am curious whether I will have the opportunity to get a Surf Dogs cap somewhere in San Diego. Do you think I'll be able to track one down while I'm there? Or is that team too far gone?
Oh, it's way too far gone. I think there's literally zero chance.
Darn it. I'm checking all the thrift stores next to any of the brew pubs in San Diego. I need your advice on something on this trip to San Diego, Dan. The Padres are playing the Rockies. I live in Colorado. I have a bunch of Rockies gear, but I'm a Phillies fan. Do I wear Rockies gear to a Padres Rockies game because they're kind of my hometown team for now?
Why not?
Okay, I will. I'll do it.
There, that was easy. In all seriousness, why not? I can tell you this. People in San Diego, it's not like going to a Yankee game at Yankee Stadium and wearing Red Sox gear, or vice versa, going to a game in Fenway and wearing Yankee gear, where you might have a beer dumped on your head, if not a fist in your face. I've seen it. It happens.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But people in San Diego, I don't think there will be any fisticuffs or spillage of alcoholic beverages.
Yeah. Also, the Rockies will be losing by 4 runs by the second inning, so it's not like anyone's going to feel bad about the Rockies. What would be funny, though, is if someone like got it all up in my face and they're like, "Your Rockies stink," and I'm like, "I'm a Phillies fan."
or you can also say, "You're right."
Yes, that's exactly right. ESPN ranked them 30 out of 30.
Sorry, I don't mean to speak ill of the Rockies. They just have not put a very good product on the field for some time now.
They are a bad baseball team. Dan, we're way off course. This has been a lot of fun. I'm glad I got it right, and I'm glad I didn't, misremember my practically local Lincoln Salt Dogs baseball team. I got to get to a game there before I move back east.
Then do it.
Then I will. All right, fine. Dan, we'll see you next week.
Okay, say your bye.